Hello, Jeff. How are you today?
I'm excellent, Mike. You're looking good. You enjoying the summer?
We're missing the Velvet Hammer this week. She,
We
she,
are.
she's
Yeah.
off. She's
We have to use some self-discipline here.
I know. She's gallivanting I don't know where she is this week. I think she's off on vacation with
I don't know. I
family.
know a little bit about Kate Hammer's schedule, and I wouldn't call it gallivanting, but
Well, hopefully she's
trying to do all that
listening.
academic work she's doing in the midst of all
I
her other
know,
duties.
I know. Working
And a
mom,
podcast.
doing an MBA, all that
Yeah.
stuff. But running a podcast without her is hard work too. So let's give ourselves some credit. How about that? Um, Well, today's show, what do you do when you're the president and CEO of an association that represents an industry under siege? Well, we'll find out in a few minutes. In the strategy suite, Jeff and I are going to be joined by our old friend, Jess Ketchum, who will bring his wit and wisdom. And we're going to look at what's on David Eby and John Rustad's to-do list this summer. What should be on that list? We're going to take stock of crime and addiction issues and where they're at right now. Alberta has the measles, but some of BC's health regions are a bit spotty too. And there's a new prospector in BC, a former cabinet minister, in fact, proving there is life after politics, even if you have to go underground to find it. But first, our interview. We're pleased to welcome back to Hotel Pacifico Kim Haakstad, who is now the president and CEO of the Council of Forest Industries, otherwise known as COFI. Appointed CEO about 6 months ago, Kim has worked at high levels in the public and private sector. She's been deputy chief of staff to the Premier of BC. She had to work with a very challenging chief of staff, I might add.
Yeah,
She
name
was
names.
vice, I won't name names. She was vice president of a leading agri-tech company and serves on the board of the Digital Supercluster. And in her spare time, she's the chair of the Mum to Mum Child Poverty Initiative. So who does Kofi represent? Some of BC's largest private companies like Canfor, West Fraser, Western Forest Products, Mosaic Forest Management, Domtar, Carrier Lumber, and on and on and on. There's no private sector industry, I would argue, with as much geographic reach than forestry. Now, just a little primer before we get into it with Kim. Maybe I'm stealing some of her lines here, but in my research tells me 1 in 28 jobs in BC are forest jobs, including 1 out of 6 manufacturing jobs. That includes 22% of all jobs in the Cariboo, 10% of all jobs in the Kootenays, lots of jobs all across the regions. 25% of forest sector jobs are actually based in the Lower Mainland. 4,800 Indigenous people directly employed. So forestry is a big deal, but it's going through some challenging times. Harvest levels are down, workforce is shrinking, sawmills and pulp mills have been closing, U.S. trade action remains an ever-present threat. So amidst all these challenges, Kim's here to tell us about the fight to protect forest jobs and is there a pathway to a brighter future? Kim, welcome back to Hotel
Thanks so
Pacifico.
much, Mike and Jeff. Glad to be here.
Good to see you.
Now, I would add that Hotel Pacifico is built with engineered wood, cedar siding, and fueled by wood pellets. Is there anything else you would recommend?
Well, hopefully all your finishing is lovely wood furniture as well. But
Oh, that's a good point,
And we
actually.
have
Yeah.
suitable setbacks from the forest, so we don't fear any interface fires.
there you go.
We're not
Yes.
gonna we're not gonna buy anything from IKEA here at the Hotel Pacifico, I can tell you that much, unless it's BC wood.
There you go.
Well, what is the situation in the woods today? What's happening in the industry?
Well, I mean, you talked about some of it in your opening comments, but the forestry sector in British Columbia is in crisis right now. We have a declining harvest levels that we've seen now over the last few years. And despite some commitments from the government during the election to increase harvest levels, their own budget for this year predicts a decrease in harvest levels. And if we continue to reduce the number of trees we're cutting and getting into our mills and secondary manufacturing facilities in BC, then we're going to continue to see closures and job losses.
Isn't there a bit of built-in? I mean, I don't quarrel with any of your statements, Kim, but it seemed to me there's two layers here. One is long-term problems, which we saw forecast with the well, we've had the softwood lumber crisis forever, but also the beetle kill and general pressures on the total avocado. And then, as you say, current issues that have further reduced the cut that is in itself a reduction from what we might have seen historically. So that there's the current ones, I guess, indigenous issues on the land and also some set-asides for old growth. So we're seeing both a long-term and a short-term downturn come together. That's how it feels to me.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for sure the trade issues are always going to be part of what we are concerned about here in British Columbia. And the schedule increase of the anti-dumping and countervailing duties from the United States that will more than double what we're paying is a big long-term issue. And so is some of the constant tweaking of forest policy that's happened in British Columbia. And some of those are long-term and some of those are new, right? We've all been around in politics in British Columbia for a long time. We know that when we were in the beetle kill harvest, that we had additional harvesting capacity and sawmilling capacity, but that's largely closed. And so now the issues that we're dealing with are actually that we're not getting enough logs to keep what everybody thought was a stable industry going post beetle moving forward. So
Mhm.
yeah,
So the government sets an annual allowable cut,
yes,
which is supposed to be like a sustainable level of harvesting, right?
yeah.
How far below the annual allowable cut are we today?
Last year, we were about 60% of the annual allowable cut, and the forecast would keep it declining, so and getting it closer to 50% versus what we'd like to see, which is, the annual allowable cut right now is about 45 mil, or is about 60 million cubic meters in British Columbia. We're cutting just over 30, and the forecast is to 29. We want to get it to at least 45 million cubic meters. And as an industry, we think about that as getting it to 45 million cubic meters is really a pathway to keep the forest industry alive in British Columbia.
Why the gap? How does government explain it? Or how do you explain
Well, I mean, there's lots of reasons for the gap, but the biggest right now, I mean, obviously market conditions are part of it, but our permitting process in British Columbia for cut permits for forestry is broken. It's not working. And it's not working because of all the regulatory change. We tried to, 5 years ago, Kofi mapped the process to cut a tree in the province. When I started here at Kofi, I asked if we could update it. The consultants who did that work said we'd have to completely redo it. That's how much change there's been in 5 years. That's a lot for any industry to sustain.
it?
And that change continues. And so we haven't really settled into a new regulatory framework at the same time as we're layering on the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People Act. And so our permitting process is full of delays. It's taking, up to 2 to 3 years to get a cut permit that should take a few months. And it also means that operations don't have a long-term plan for what they're going to cut when. And so they're living a bit hand to mouth to get product into mills and then into the upstream or further up the value chain to pulp and paper mills, biomass facilities, and the secondary manufacturing that builds other wood products.
What are the biggest pain points in the permitting process? Like where are things really bogging down?
They're bogging down at number one, we don't have actually a single process across the province. Other industries are looking at one window of permitting. We would love one window of permitting, but first we'd actually like the same rules in each forest area, operating area of the province. The other place that it's bogging down is at First Nations referrals. I think you probably hear this from other sectors as well. The quantity of referrals that are coming to nations from government is much higher than First Nations can sustain. And that's funded by own source revenue by nations. And so, it's complex to unwind, but we need to support nations to handle the capacity that government's throwing at them. I was talking to a nation a couple of weeks ago who was saying they have over 2,500 permit applications and referrals sitting on their desk right now, and just a small number of people to handle them. So we've got to work on that process too.
Your industry counterpart, Michael Goring, was on the pod here in January, and he raised the same issue of capacity to deal with referrals. And he was suggesting, if I recall correctly, um, possibility of a shared services model where First Nations, maybe there's a different way to help get referrals done. Um, do you think about that, like from the First Nations perspective, on what could help them get the referrals done in a way that
Yeah.
they still have control over it?
We look at that, and who spends a lot of time thinking about that is Leonard Joe, who's CEO of the First Nations Forestry Council. And I think that's probably where that shared services model best lives, right? Is in a First
Yeah.
Nations controlled entity. But I think we could also work with government to look at where are the bottlenecks in the system and how do we start breaking those down? Like, do we create a triage squad that looks at some of the permits that have been sitting for a long time, either not being applied for or still in the process and not approved, or even approved and not cut? What are all the problems that are actually impeding our ability to meet the 45 million target cubic meter target harvest, as well as to get closer to that AAC?
You know, when I was there under John Horgan, one of the projects that everybody was very enthusiastic about at the time, including the public service, was the removal of the Ministry of Water, Lands and Resource Stewardship from Forestry, because historically, going back under the BC Liberal administration, they'd been in a single body. You know, these new ministries are always look better maybe in the shop window than they do when you're actually driving them. But is that something that failed in your mind? Has the new ministry been a problem, or is it still part of the solution?
I think that there's a bunch of issues that exist within the Ministry of Forests, and I'm not sure that that would change whether or not the what is the, we call it Walrus Ministry, it
Mm-hmm.
was in there or not. I don't know. But what I would say is we don't have enough whole of government effort to support what forestry needs, right? I think the Ministry of Forests is left alone a lot to struggle through. That's why we worked with the government to get forestry declared a major project, similar to how we're talking about mining and LNG, so that we have folks from transportation, the Ministry of Indigenous Reconciliation, Walrus, and others at the table looking at how all of them can support forestry in order to meet the objectives. And of course, we're not talking about reducing the environmental protection. We need to balance, environment, economics, and reconciliation, right? Like, we're not saying water it down. We're saying make it work, make it make sense, make it more streamlined and more understandable.
Well, is there frustration building in the forest sector when you look at other industries you've just mentioned, where natural gas and LNG, you've got the BC Energy Regulator getting regulatory control um, from the BC Environmental Assessment Office, and having a one window approach. Mining's,
Yeah.
the sun is shining on mining. Government can't get enough of these critical minerals announcements. But good old forestry, um, in a state of crisis with a huge payroll in British Columbia, doesn't seem to get the political attention.
Yeah.
Why
And
is that?
You know, it's interesting because I think we have gotten the political attention in some respects. You think about all the times that Premier Eby has been out in the media talking about trade. He leads very often with softwood lumber and the concerns that we have about additional tariffs that could come on the forestry industry. But are we getting the action? And that's where we feel like we're not quite at right now, where we need to be. We need more action, not just conversations. We've got to roll up our sleeves between industry, government, First Nations, and really figure out how we can get the sector moving again. Because First Nations, you mentioned a stat off the top, but First Nations are also now 20% of the forest tenures in British Columbia are held by nations. And so we don't want those facilities in those regions to close. And then those First Nations tenures, many of which they've purchased at significant cost, to become stranded assets.
Yeah, I think you're raising a very important point, because my experience was that the forest sector, whatever individual CEO's views were of UNDRIP or anything else, was very advanced in terms of its engagement with First Nations in very practical ways, right on the ground with employees, supporting communities, all of that kind of thing. So there was not very much you could tell a forest industry executive about working with First Nations. It was already part of their complete framework. But working with them, as you say, and having them having the capacity to respond are two different things. And it seems like a very difficult area to solve. Is it up to the government to provide the resources to First Nations, or is there more that the industry itself can do to facilitate this?
Well, it's interesting because I spent some time working in LNG, and I would say, when you're talking about those major infrastructure projects, linear infrastructure projects, or, mining, which is more single site based, you are talking about multi-million or billion-dollar project development conversations. And so you have a lot of money to put on the table to move the dial on things and to work on economic benefits and capacity building with nations. Right now in forestry, we're looking generally cut permit by cut permit. So those are really small compared to what we're talking about in some of the other industries. And so we don't have the same kind of, you know, there's just not the same kind of dollars to support some of that capacity building and economic development. So we need to look at both the fact that forestry is long term and, stays in communities for ideally for generations, and the fact that we don't have money to put towards every single cut permit. So, I think government supporting nations to offset some of that own source revenue generation where there's lack of capacity could be something that's worth looking at. That's a conversation I'd want to have more with the First Nations Forestry Council too, because, I do believe that nations should be in the driver's seat on these things. But at the same time, government is the one throwing all those referrals, government and industry putting all those referrals on nations, and we can't leave them alone to deal with it.
Guess this week, a new expression comes to mind. Actions speak louder than words. It comes to mind as we've been talking about removing barriers to interprovincial trade and how this can support stronger competition amongst telecom companies, which is good for consumers and a win for affordability. But, as I mentioned, some large telecoms are fighting to reduce competition and threatening to withdraw investment. They're lobbying federal cabinet members to overturn the decision by the CRTC that forces carriers to share access to their high-speed internet networks. So, if we all agree that actions speak louder than words, what do we make of Bell Canada's actions? Because while they've been lobbying to overturn that CRTC decision because they don't want to share wholesale access to their fiber networks here in Canada, they've at the same time been investing in US companies that profit off selling wholesale access to fiber networks. Oh, and in order to fund that $5 billion expansion in the US, they sold Canadian assets, including their stake in MLSE. Which kind of makes you wake up and smell the cold cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee. Is Bell really opposed to wholesaling fiber networks, or are they just afraid of real competition? Because TELUS is ready to double down on sharing access to networks in the West and the East for better competition and better prices for Canadian consumers. So it's over to Minister Jolie, who I'm pretty sure knows what to do when someone's actions don't meet their words, especially if it's costing Canadians. Let the CRTC decision stand.
Let's split screen this conversation.
Yeah.
It's often said there are two industries in the forest industry. One's the coast and one's the interior. Both have different set of challenges. Can you give us a glimpse of what's on the dashboard for both of them right now in terms of what they need to compete?
Well, everybody needs more fiber. When we talk about that in forestry, like everybody knows what that means. That's really, we need logs getting to mills to be processed. And on the coast, the situation is dire and immediate, and the interior is only a small step behind that. So, the coastal industry, like the rest of the industry in the province, but, when we talk about the coast, one thing that's important maybe to tell listeners is a big portion of the coastal industry is actually on Vancouver Island. So when you think about the integrated nature of the industry on Vancouver Island, sawmills need pulp mills and pulp mills need sawmills, and then they need the other manufacturing sector that exists on the island to also work in concert. They're customers for each other, they're suppliers for each other, and so you need that whole integrated system working. It is hard when we're short on fiber to get enough chips to pulp mills to do what they need to do. If the pulp mills go down, likely the sawmills.
So just to
do
spell
too.
it out for listeners who may not be familiar with the industry, the log goes to the sawmill, turned into lumber or whatever. It produces a ton of chips, and those chips get sold. Those chips get sold to pulp mills for them. Does that explain the supply chain?
That's right. And
Yeah.
there's one more sort of byproduct, if you want to call it, of sawmills, and that is sort of, we call it hog fuel. Nobody really has been able to explain to me the origin of that, but that's what we're using largely for bio energy creation as well. So, there's a number of different products that can come from the start of getting a log to a mill and getting the dimensional lumber cut, and then using everything that's left over in order to create other products. And, I think about this. I grew up in Grand Prairie, Alberta, and lots of people in British Columbia will have grown up in similar communities where we had a beehive burner. And, as the wind changed, so did the ash move, and you had determined whether or not you had to brush off your car even in the summer. Now we take that sawdust that used to be burned in those burners and we make MDF board, which is a you talked about IKEA furniture earlier. That's
Maybe I
the
will
stuff
get
that's
IKEA furniture for the
in the
hotel.
IKEA furniture. So,
Yeah.
it is an important product now that we use and that everybody has some of it in their home. And before we used to burn that. So, we've become really much better too about using every bit of the log that's delivered to the mill.
But to your point though about the integration, because back in the old days, it used to be like MacBlow was integrated, right?
Yep.
They chopped down the tree, they sawmilled it, they had their own pulp mill. Now it's different companies doing different things. But the fact remains the pulp mill still relies on the sawmill. Those pulp mills on Vancouver Island are huge, and we've lost
Yeah.
some. We
Yeah.
lost Port Alice, we lost Campbell River, we lost Gold River, but we still have Crofton, we have Port Alberni, and we've got Harmac in Nanaimo, right?
Hmm.
They've all got big payrolls, unionized payrolls. They all underpin the municipal finances of the municipalities they're in, and they're also big customers of BC Hydro too.
Yes.
Now, so if a pulp mill goes down, that is a devastating blow to these communities. And you're saying that on the coast, the whole system's in trouble.
The whole system is in trouble. I am very worried about whether or not our coastal industry is going to make it through the summer. We're what, July 15th. On July 21st, the anti-dumping duties are scheduled to increase with countervailing duties quickly behind that. That will take it from about 14% on our exports to the US duties to 35% duties. So, when you think about the fact that we're already short supply, and the costs of doing business are going to go up and for our biggest market, the United States, it means that it's quite dire. And so if we don't do work within the borders of British Columbia to get supply to mills and to make the industry more cost competitive, we're also the most expensive jurisdiction in Canada to work in the forest industry. So we've got to figure out how we support both those coastal mills and facilities, but also the interior, because it's really the key. One of the key differences that I think about right now is that you're in a core harvest season for the coastal industry right now. They harvest in the summer, and there's a lot of work they can't do when the snow flies in higher elevations on the island. Where in the interior, we actually do most of our harvesting in the fall and through the winter and haul when the roads are frozen. So, the industries actually operate on a different cycle. And that's why right now I'm much more worried about the coast, because we're not harvesting what we need in this core portion of the year. And they have about 2 months of understanding of where those next logs are coming from. Some may be up to 6, but ideally the companies that are members of Kofi would want to have 2 years of standing timber inventory, so they know where their next logs to fill the mill are coming from.
But politically, Kim, don't you think the industry's in a hell of a spot because the public, especially the urban public, to the degree they pay attention at all, think we've reached peak forest a long time ago? And they go, yeah, it's on fire. And if I flew over Vancouver Island a couple of weeks ago, and there's been a lot of trees cut. You can tell that from the air and still see activity going on. Isn't there a sense that, oh well, that ship sailed in the minds of too many British Columbians?
Well, it's interesting. First, I'll start with a stat that was really interesting as I got into the industry. So there's 57 million hectares of forested land in British Columbia. Each year, we harvest less than half of 1% of that. So, we are not harvesting a huge amount of British Columbia's forested land base in any given year. But we actually recently did a public opinion poll, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me. But one of my biggest takeaways was that on support for the forest industry, the rural urban divide did not come through in the poll that we did. I really thought it would. But, support was a little bit lower in the lower mainland and Vancouver than it was in other parts of the province, but not to the degree that I expected, given the rural urban divide that I remember, when I think about all resource industries that I think about
Yeah.
when I was working in the provincial government, or, I've been involved in and following politics in this province for almost 30 years. But the rural urban divide wasn't there on forestry. And that's fascinating. I want to unpack
That's
that more and learn
encouraging.
more about it. Yeah.
Well, I'll unpack it for you.
Okay. The pollster.
That's what we do at the hotel. We unpack your bags, full service. I think what's happening in forestry might be similar to what happens in energy as well, which is when you say urban, I think there's a distinction between urban and suburban. And if I can put that on to the results of the last couple elections, federally and provincially, we do see different voter attitudes in the multicultural communities, and
Yeah.
certainly when you get further away from the big city and the universities. And it would not surprise me that support for forestry is quite strong in Surrey, Richmond, Burnaby, Maple Ridge, right? Where attitudes are a bit different than, say, West Point Grey.
Yeah, and
Um,
so we actually did though. We separated out the city of Vancouver from the rest of Metro to look at that, and it wasn't as different as we expected,
okay,
which is
well,
interesting.
that's
Yeah,
probably a good thing. And that might be because forestry's seen as renewable.
it
And
is renewable, not just seen as, right?
okay, fair enough.
Yeah, there were a lot of areas that have been cut but are very green now, to be
Uh,
fair.
Other than Fairy
Yeah.
Creek, which is more recent conflagration, the war in the woods hasn't been as, strong a narrative as it was, say, 20 years ago. So that may be something, that forestry's not in the, not in the middle of the storm as maybe it was in past years.
Yeah, I think people are also starting to understand that when we think about the forest fires that we have been dealing with, and it looks like not a bad year so far in British Columbia, knock on wood, that doesn't get worse. But in the rest of the country, we could have up to the second worst fire season on record. And so, as we've learned more about forest fires, one of the things I think we are learning and the public is starting to understand is that if we just protect areas and we leave them be, then they actually become a greater source of fuel for forest fires. And so there actually is some active forest management, is the term we use in the industry, that needs to be done to actually ensure that we preserve those areas that we also want to protect. And that does include removing some, doing some commercial thinning or removing some of the dry and dead forest floor or trees in order to make sure that we're actually truly giving those areas the best chance of protection. And so, that's a conversation we have to keep having here, but we can't create parkland and set it and forget it and assume it won't burn.
But there's a cost associated with that too. I mean, it's the same with reforestation in the past. Who should pay for reforestation and how accountable should they be? Like all of the, I'm sure, large burden now of roads that ought to be decommissioned, but forest companies with their backs to the wall are not going to be paying for that, and the government has no money. So it's a vicious circle.
Well, yes, and we have more ability to manage that with a robust forestry sector than if we don't have a strong forestry sector, right? When you talk to folks in California, they'll talk about the fact that the cost of managing that wildland urban interface, so how close the forest is to the community and the fire risk in that, is going to be completely borne by the taxpayers in California because they don't have their own forest industry. Where in British Columbia, we can look at what can we do with an economic purpose or a commercial purpose, and then what does the government and taxpayers have to fund in order to do that. So we actually can balance some of that and offset some of that cost if we can make sure that there's commercial ways to access that. So, that's a big part of the conversation that continues with in the government. And I think Minister Parmar actually is really trying to push this to help people understand that protection of forests at all costs is not a good thing. And if there's ways to do commercial thinning and commercial harvesting that actually prevents forest fires, we need to do more on that. But, Geoff, you make an important point. Like, forest industry can absorb those costs, and ideally, it's not all borne by the taxpayers. So how do we work together to make it work?
There was a report out the other day that the GHG emissions from forest fires, I think in 2023, were more than all of Canada put together. Like there was so much GHG emissions from fire in 2023. Um, just to make the point that that was a really bad fire season, as they have mostly been from year to year in the last decade. Um, we had John Vellante on here about a year ago talking about his book Fire Weather, so it's pretty sobering. Having said that, do you think there's potential to limit or be realistic about it, but to do a better job or find better results on fire suppression? Is there a pathway there, or are we just getting what we're going to get?
I'm not an expert here, so I think you're best to talk to others, but one of the things that I understand is part of why we feel like we've been okay in the forest fire season so far this year in BC is that we've been able to get to those fires quickly and prevent spread. And you'd need to talk to someone from, some of the universities are doing amazing work on studying how we do manage forest fires and what kind of suppression work we do. I want to be careful to not go there, but
Yeah.
So for sure, the quick response and attack that the BC Wildfire Service is doing is, they're saying themselves that it's seeing some results, which is great to see.
But it's a large number. I've been told that in some of the Prince George forest districts, fire has eliminated a very significant share. I think the number was 20 or 30% of all of the potentially harvestable trees, like not just this year's or next year's, but a third of it all.
Yeah, and so, when we think about the allowable annual cut set by the independent chief forester, we know that in some of these areas where even beetle, as far back as when we were still doing beetle removal, or because of forest fires, the timber supply reviews haven't been completed, and so we don't know. And that's part of the reason why industries worked with government to say that 45 million cubic meters is a good target harvest. I mean, we see that as a floor, not a ceiling. But we also know that the AAC needs to be updated. So we get that it might go down some. So, between the current about 60 million cubic meters and the harvest that's around 30, there's some room there to both grow and make sure we're supporting the industry and reflect some of that, Geoff. But we need those updated timber supply reviews in those areas so that we really do understand what the future looks like, because that's more about how do we plan for harvesting over the next several years, not just what are we doing this year.
We come back to softwood lumber for a minute. I've got something I want to get off my chest. You may not agree with it, but I think it's a teachable moment for Canadians who will never have paid any attention to this dispute because it's gone on for so long, and in many respects, it's a microcosm of what we're facing now with the Trump administration. So a trade tribunal comes along, it looks at our industry and says, hey, you guys are very socialistic, you have crown land. We want a more private enterprise model, otherwise we'll believe that you're subsidizing your industry, so we're putting a tariff on you. And the size of the tariff, which is contested by Canada, and we've won a number of cases, is enormous. It's in billions and billions of dollars. In other words, money that might have been available to the Canadian producers to invest had there not been a softwood lumber dispute. Is that fair so far?
Well, yeah, there's more than $10 billion of duties on deposit at the US Department of Commerce that would otherwise have been able to be utilized by the Canadian industry.
Yeah. And so in the face of this reality, which is a 20-year-old reality at least, a lot of producers, and I'll name Canfor as one, has gone, well, we got to hedge our production here because we have a huge market in the United States. So we'll now invest, purchase, and buy assets in the United States, which otherwise might have invested here because they're trying to maintain the viability of the company. In other words, have a share of their production that's tariff-free in the States. And it seems to me that this is, I don't blame Canfor for making sound business decisions, but that's been at BC's expense, capital investment and innovation that might have happened here. And I worry that Canadians underestimate how many Canadian businesses may make the same decision in the face of tariffs in their own sector. I mean, this has been something that's been very obvious in the forest sector, but could become a reality for other manufacturers and other Canadian firms in the face of the Trump attack. So there's no prospect, I take it, in the current climate that we'll ever see that $10 billion, or it's, as you say, getting even worse.
Well, yeah, I mean, on softwood, we don't know, right? We know that President Trump is unpredictable, so we're not sure what can happen there. But when I think about some of the things you said, the other piece, Geoff, is though Canadian companies, many of them BC based, that started here in British Columbia, like Canfor and West Fraser and Toco and Interfor, have expanded in Canada too. Why have they expanded in other jurisdictions in Canada and not in British Columbia? Well, that's the thing us as British Columbians really need to think about. And in my role as President CEO Kofi, I need to think about with the BC government is what can we do within our own borders on what we can control? And that is our regulatory environment. That is the cost competitiveness of our jurisdiction. So, because we, as you say, we don't see a short-term solution to the softwood lumber dispute, but we do see investments from companies in other parts of Canada instead of BC. So let's see what we can do here in British Columbia to bring that investment back.
Yeah. Okay.
So Kim, bring it home with your priority list then. What are the 2 or 3 things that are absolute priorities to get the industry back on track?
absolute number one is we need to get logs to sawmills. And, so that means that we need to get cut permits in our hands so that we can cut logs into dimensional lumber that can be used for all sorts of other secondary manufacturing, including mass timber and wood furniture and beautiful wood finishings, and toilet paper and diapers and all sorts of other paper products that the pulp mills make. So that is by far the largest priority, and there's a whole bunch of things that fall under that. But we look at getting the BC timber sales system working, getting their logs to market. We need regulatory certainty or predictability at least. We need partnerships with First Nations. The future of all industries, but forestry for sure is in partnership with First Nations. And we need to understand that how we're going to balance the priorities on the land base. How do we make sure that we're protecting our, beautiful British Columbia, getting economic benefit, and being part of the solution on First Nations reconciliation?
Okay.
Sounds straightforward.
Yeah.
What's the problem?
Yeah, right?
You should get right on it.
If there was one thing, we would have done it, right? But it all does come down to wanting to make sure that we're protecting jobs. Like, we all want to retain forestry jobs. We don't want to retrain forestry workers, right? That's a really important part of what we want to do today. And I don't think I said enough about that. So I want to add that too.
You bet. Well, Kim, thanks for coming back to the Hotel Pacifico and for tuning us up on forest issues. Wishing you well for a calm fire season in the
Thank you. Yes.
4 to 6 weeks ahead here or longer, that the fire season will be upon us. And hopefully you can see some renewed momentum for the industry going into the fall.
Thanks so much. Great to be here. Thanks, Mike and Geoff. Nice to see you both.
Thanks, Kim.
Pop quiz from our sponsor this week, listeners. What is a deep energy retrofit? Well, it's more than just a renovation. A deep energy retrofit is a comprehensive upgrade to an existing building that significantly improves its energy performance. We're talking better insulation, tighter air sealing, and high-efficiency mechanical systems, all working together to cut energy use and emissions. Why does it matter? Because buildings are responsible for over 10% of BC's greenhouse gas emissions. Earlier this spring, FortisBC hit a big milestone, the completion of deep energy retrofit upgrades at Manor House, a 50-unit affordable rental building in North Vancouver, originally built in 1972. This project is part of a $50 million pilot program to find the best ways to cut energy use in older homes and multifamily buildings across BC, key to meeting BC's climate goals. The target? A 50% or greater reduction in whole building energy use. That means lower energy bills for building owners and keeping rent low for tenants. For buildings like Manor House, it also means helping keep rents affordable and ensuring residents live in a safe, healthy home that's built to last another 50 years or more. Hey FortisBC, how do I go about getting a deep energy retrofit at Hotel Pacifico? I mean, there's a lot of hot air. Anyways, FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast. Okay, we're back in the strategy suite, joined by our old friend Jess Ketchum, spiritual leader of the Not NDP party, and possibly the last remaining SoCred in British Columbia. Jess, welcome back to Hotel Pacifico.
Thanks very much, guys. Pleased to be here.
What'd you make of the interview with Kim?
Well, I've known Kim for a long time. She's a very capable woman, and I'm pleased that for the forest industry that she's in her job. It strikes me that having had a 35-year relationship with Kofi and with the forest industry in a number of different ways, softwood lumber for a long time as well, that many of the issues remain the same. And Geoff sort of capsulized it for me with his last comments around the tariffs and softwood lumber. I mean, the fact of the matter is, when I was working with Kofi and the BC Lumber Trade Council, and we're going off to Washington, D.C. to all those weeks-long meetings down there, we're always at a disadvantage because the government of the United States didn't really care what we thought. And they didn't really care about the law. And they didn't really care about the process that had gone on before, or the World Trade Organization, or all those tribunals that are supposed to be able to render decisions on these disputes. It was all about the local operators, the local small sawmill operators who really ran the file, and it was all about politics. And nothing's changed, right, Geoff? Nothing has changed.
No, we see the same syndrome writ large. So we can say that Trump is an outlier or a crazy guy who just wandered in, but in fact, this is the dynamic we were facing in the forest industry for a generation. But Jess, you'll remember, maybe you could tell us a bit about it, when Bill Bennett, as a social credit premier, said BC is not for sale in the face of an attempt to have some foreign investment in McMillan Bloedel. How times have changed, eh?
Foreign investment, I think it was from Toronto, I think.
Was it that far away? Holy smoke.
That was foreign to Bill Bennett anyways.
How times have changed is right, but I mean, the public perception of the forest industry, as Kim was referencing, has changed somewhat as well, right? I mean, I grew up in the interior, and in my hometown, Quesnel was at one point was the heaviest industrialized community in BC, and was all about forestry. And it didn't matter, you talked about 28% of the jobs being in forestry. Excuse me, it was way more than that, because it didn't matter whether you worked in a shoe store or a restaurant. It depended on the forest industry to keep them going, right? So it was, it's that big and that important. But it wasn't all that long ago that we had a premier in Gordon Campbell. Remember, wood is good? I mean, everywhere he went, it was the wood is good mantra. And it got to be almost, even for those of us who were involved with the industry, kind of went, guys, sure, when's he going to stop that one line? Well, he didn't. And at the same time, he was opening up trade offices in Asia to try to get away from our dependency on the U.S. For our forest products. And that sort of profile for the industry, advocacy for the industry, I don't see from government. I see Parmar, I don't know him, but I see him as a minister who's relatively new to his portfolio, and he's talking some good things, as Kim mentioned. And it's going to, it's where the rubber meets the road. But he talked about getting cutting permits from like 45 days to 25 days. Well, that's all fine and good, but right now they're way more than that. We're nowhere close to actually getting to our annual allowable cut. The forest sector in BC is not getting the love, respect that it deserves. It really is not. And it's so unfortunate because, those towers in downtown Vancouver, the public would be shocked to know how many floors in those towers are there because of the forest industry. It might not be a forest company. It may be a law firm or an engineering firm, but huge impact even in Metro Vancouver.
And not to be missed, Jess, it's revenue positive to government.
Yeah, revenue positive to government.
Imagine that.
I think you are seeing a difference if you compare, a ministry led by Adrian Dix to a ministry led by Ravi Parmar. Now, the circumstances are different because there's a lot more optimism and energy, and there's growth potential and energy. But you definitely can feel it downtown that
Led by Adrian?
Adrian's super engaged on his portfolio and
I see.
engaging industry on the issues. And that may be an unfair comparison to Ravi Parmar. I just think we don't know a lot about Ravi Parmar, at least people outside the NDP, speaking for myself. Yeah. But he's got a tough job to assert himself as a minister to show that he is grappling with the fundamental challenges facing the sector and that he's able to do something positive about it, because it sounds like they're in the grips of a crisis and government hasn't figured out how to help industry work its way out of it.
Well, they've certainly been told how to do it. Now, they might not have accepted the advice as yet, and they're trying to determine what the best advice is, but they should be listening, they should be acting, they have to act. And it's kind of unfair to compare other ministers to Adrian Dix. I mean, I don't know if there's anybody that can grapple with very difficult files the way that he has over the years. I'm an admirer, actually.
Well, we don't want to pump his tires too much.
No.
So let's
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
send us a book and we'll say nice things about you. Um, so let's talk about we're entering into the dog days of summer here. This is a time when it's perceived that politics goes to sleep, or does it? I want to ask you fellows, what's on David Eby and John Rustad's summer to-do list, or what should be on that list? What do you think, Geoff?
Well, I always mark the beginning of the real summer with the trip to the Premier's Conference. I'm not sure where it is this year,
Right.
which involved taking a group of people, the Premier and some senior people, to a big discussion. I think it'll be pretty critical one this year. It takes up a lot of time, but after that, things get really quiet. If I was Premier Eby, I would be doing what I think John Rustad's doing some of, is worry about leadership review, because there's an NDP convention coming up in the fall. And I don't know that there's any challengers. It's just a yes, no. Do you think there should be a review question at the NDP? Whereas Rustad, I think, is a more complicated challenge to face. But it's important that that convention be buoyant and upbeat, and that people are happy and comfortable with what the government's achieved. So that would be one thing I would look at. And another one is I would talk to the key people involved and see if there's a pathway to a settlement for public sector bargaining. It's been very quiet. There has been a proposal tabled by the employer, which obviously is not going to succeed. The first one never does. But it would be really regrettable if the fall was dominated by turmoil over public sector bargaining, given the budget that needs to be developed for the coming year.
Well, if it's not settled by the fall, you'd think there'd be strikes or lockouts.
Well,
or
there's
something.
been no strike votes yet, but if there are some, I mean, we encountered strike by the BCGU under what I would say were more comfortable circumstances financially. So if that happens again, who knows? And there could be any number of other of the unions that are in bargaining. So those are things that I would make sure were in good shape before I took a well-deserved few weeks off.
Council Federation is next week, actually, in Huntsville, Ontario. So there you go.
That's right,
There's the
Huntsville,
answer to
yeah.
your question.
Part of
What about you, Jess? What would be on your list? Maybe for Mr. Rustad. How about start with that? What would you be
Well,
doing
yeah,
for
I
him?
mean, unfortunately for Rustad, his agenda is sort of forced on by the leadership review. He has to go riding by riding by riding, which I just find shocking from a process perspective, that you would have the need to go riding by riding, but also over an extended period of time.
As it was with the BC Liberals.
Yeah, I know that, Mike.
Yeah.
And it was unacceptable then.
Democracy, Jess.
Yeah. I'm all for democracy, but I have to tell you, it should be efficient, right? We need to have more efficiency, and to have Rustad saddled into having to do that all summer is going to be difficult, because he only gets to listen to one side of the story. He only gets to listen to conservatives, and I think of summers going back a long time in my political history, where the start of the summer was really the Williams Lake Stampede or the Anaheim Lake Stampede, and it was that Alex Fraser at the time basically started his summer listening tour, and that's what he did. He went and he sat down with people and listened. You didn't hear Alex talking a lot during those sessions. He went community to community, community, and listened to people. And I think that's what certainly David Eby needs to do. And if I were him, I would be spending an inordinate amount of time, where the votes count for him, where he has his strengths, because I think that he's somewhat at risk. I think that, one of my favorite topics being crime, violence, and public disorder, that they are not in the best of positions on that issue, and because of the lack of results. And I think that for him to be out in those communities, listening to people about their issues and why they think it's important and what they might think could be done. I think that's critically important for the NDP.
Well, sometimes summer can be deceptively sneaky sometimes in terms of issues getting away on a government and just festering because when the news cycle is not that busy, some issues just stick around longer and get lots of coverage. And one that's happening right now is the rare disease issue, where the government's been drawn into this very difficult situation of playing the role of are you going to fund $800,000 or whatever it is for this medical treatment or not? And it gets to be a very binary story. And, that's Jess, that's a tough one for the government to manage. I always feel like having been inside government, maybe Geoff has got a perspective on this too. It's sometimes you feel like the public is not hearing all the facts or government can't say everything that it would like to say. Nevertheless, it's an issue management conundrum and a bit of a debacle sometimes, how these things play out.
Well, that's a very, very difficult situation, and I was not in the same roles as you guys were in government, but having been there, I feel the same way, Mike. Where I had to deal with some very difficult issues back in the day, and my respect for the public service grew so much in those early days, recognizing that so often decisions were made that the public didn't have appreciation for the facts. They didn't have them, they didn't accept them, whatever it might be. This is certainly one of those. However, my my thought is, and I'd be interested in yours. My thought is that the minister should be saying to her senior staff that $800,000 is a lot of money. However, it's a life we're talking about. We're going to pay that $800,000 unless we can provide the public and our administration with conclusive evidence that the efficacy of this drug no longer applies. And I don't think they've been able to do that. If they have, they certainly haven't done it publicly or very well. So, I think it's most unfortunate. I don't want to second guess people in these sorts of decisions. It's a real tough one.
Yeah, I think that I watched some of these secondhand when I was working in Victoria, and Jess, you're absolutely right. But the basic policy is makes perfect sense. But as soon as you start explaining it, you're explaining and you're losing in the face of a sobbing parent who sees the chances for their child slipping away. But the public policy aspect of it, apart from the human politics of it, is equally unassailable because, and there are vested interests that will promote the use of these drugs for humane reasons, even when arguably the medical benefit's really not that great. And we all face those issues every day. If we get a test for cancer, God forbid, there may be certain diagnoses where it's suitable to go for the full-on treatment, and other individuals will decide on their own behalf that they would prefer to take a different route and take their chances a different way. So we all face this in our own lives, but we seldom face it on behalf of someone else the way the Minister of Health does in this case. So I'll be very interested to see if it continues. There was a case that Adrian Dix, who we were just talking about, dealt with when he was newly appointed health minister. Very touching case as well. I can't remember the specifics, and it was nowhere near as expensive.
They happen to every government, yeah.
Yeah, but this woman came in her wheelchair to public events that were organized by the NDP to appeal personally to him. I mean, a very, very painful and difficult thing. And yet we all know that there's very expensive therapies that are used every day, which may or may not be successful in extending someone's life, but there's no debate over it. So it's a very tough.
Well, you do get rare diseases too, like cystic fibrosis, where the treatments can be really expensive, but there's not that many CF patients.
Right.
There at any given time in BC, maybe 200 to 300.
Well, I think in this case, there's usually about one in BC.
On the one that Batten's disease, yeah. So, I mean, it is an issue like, well, rare disease numbers are, because they're rare, the numbers are pretty low. So to what degree are we factoring in insurance here? Like there's close to 5 million people in BC, lots of taxpayers. How much are we accounting for someone who needs $1 million a year in a treatment? And that's a big lofty policy question, which I know that I'm sure they're grappling with in the Ministry of Health. But I think to your point, Jess, it's just this current situation. It's not clicking in terms of the
But I
government's
think, Mike, if you step
case.
back and look at the larger context for the NDP, and maybe I should have said this in my first comment, the fall is going to be a very challenging period for the David Eby administration for all the reasons that Jess laid out, but particularly because they've got to figure out a way to have a more exciting and positive session than they had in the spring. It was a tough session with lots of stuff kicked back and all that kind of thing. And a sense of momentum going both to the NDP convention and then into the budget process. And that requires laying a lot of pipe. And if you're responding to the budget questions, this is why I think it's so tough with the drug issue we've just been discussing. There's a mindset in the government, I'm sure, that we need to save every penny we can. And when someone's standing in front of you with an issue that has a cost, the first instinct would be say, I got to say no for cost reasons, never mind whatever the other policy issues are. And we're going to see that, I think, in like Kim Haakstad's discussion about permits. How do you get permits out faster? Usually by spending some money. You can't do it for free. Where does the money come from to increase capacity for First Nations to do permits faster? It's going to come from the government. The companies aren't going to put it in. And so each of those ministers and all of those deputy ministers and ADMs in particular are wrestling with these things every day, I'm sure. And there's plenty of political pain to come from trying to achieve savings in these cases.
Well, with Jess here, one of the issues that will be on the government's plate in the fall, and it's a bit quiet right now, is the issue of street crime and addiction, and all the things that go into it. Where are we at, Jess? We had a lot of publicity on this in the spring. A lot of attention. The Globe and Mail front page a few weeks ago on the Victoria situation was quite jarring. Where do you see this issue heading as we move towards a busier fall politically?
Well, I'd like to be able to say, Mike, that we have data showing that there have been dramatic improvements. We don't have that, and it's not that government haven't attempted to make changes or haven't made some investments, but I look at it this way, that we keep making incremental improvements, incremental attempts, pilot projects, where we need transformational. We need big changes. We need, now going back to Jeff's comment about finances, I mean, investments have to be made in some things, but I happen to think that some of these things are more important than others, and you just have to keep pushing them up the priority pole, if you will. And I think there are a whole lot of things that we talk about that are more important than, for example, soccer games, but I won't get into that. But
you just did. You just raised it. Are you talking about FIFA? What will this? Do you think as the world comes to Vancouver next year, the street crime issue will be a bigger deal because of the international tension that possibly could be served up on that?
Yeah, I think that there will be quite a bit of attention internationally that we should be guarding against and preparing for. We went through this with the Olympics in downtown East Side. I mean, steps should be taken to resolve, not just cover up, but resolve some of these issues. Mike, I think we need to be able to define between what is it that the province is responsible, what is it that the feds are responsible for, the municipalities, the jurisdictional disputes. I'm really tired of the finger pointing that goes on between levels of government. It's really unfortunate. Just so you know, SOS yesterday in Kelowna made a presentation to the entire federal BC Liberal caucus. And so, the members were all there. SOS presented primarily on bail reform, the need to do something about the revolving door on not just violent offenders, but just repeat offenders, period. The problem being with so much of this, and Geoff has written so well about it, much of this crime is as a result of people who are suffering from addictions and and mental illness. And so when people are arrested for committing a crime, they need to be assessed to determine whether they go down the justice system track completely, or do they need a healthcare response? And the problem is that we don't have the capacity to do the assessment. Never mind the healthcare response. Our response for addictions and mental health in BC, I tell you, it's incremental. We have, government announcing another 10 beds over here, another 10 over there, but when we need hundreds, and they recognize that, they know that, and yet you can't find a plan that lays out, we need to have so many more of these facilities here because of the demand, and this is when we need them. And yes, there's a cost to that. But I have to tell you, as someone who's dealing with the healthcare system intensely for the last 5 years, that, boy, I'll tell you, I've had wonderful care. And every time I see those people who are suffering on the street from addictions and mental illness, I think, what the hell? Why are they in that position and not getting the care they need when others of us seem to be able to rave about our healthcare system, which I do?
I think a lot of people ask that question, Jess, but I want to ask you a different one, which is about the extortion issues that we see arising in south of the Fraser, where people's homes are being shot up, businessmen are being shaken down for significant sums of money. There's threats of violence. All this seems now to be agreed. Premier Eby proposing that the Bishnoi gang be registered as a terrorist organization. What was your response to that? I mean, I had my own, but I'd be curious to hear yours.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the terrorists. If it provides them with the additional tools they need to eradicate that threat, then fine. You can call them whatever you want. Sunday school, I don't care. But the fact of the matter is, these people are so dangerous, obviously, and I come from the rule of law. I think you need to make examples of people when you do catch them, and we have some suspects now. We need to be able to ensure that people are charged, prosecuted properly, and incarcerated, or sent home. I'm not sure which it is, but I think that we have a specific problem there. We know that there's a specific target group for that criminal element, which is unfortunate, but yeah, we need to make examples of them, Geoff.
Were you, I can't get soccer off my mind here. Were you surprised to hear that the provincial courts will be closed during FIFA in the Lower Mainland?
Yeah, I was, but I just thought that isn't that indicative of the problem? I mean, we have a couple of soccer games and we have to shut down our judicial system. I mean, really? Because we're going to send the sheriffs over to take care of the crowd control? Yeah, so I was surprised.
Well, I ran into a judge who obviously has no opinion on the matter, but explained that so I asked him about this because I was dumbfounded by it because it's for a significant period of time, and the announcement
About a
came
month,
from,
I think, yeah. As far as
yeah,
Chilliwack.
and well, all the hotel rooms are taken. So where are you going to put the jury? And and all the hotel rooms are taken. So where are you going to put the witnesses? And then there's all these security zones that the police won't be available to get. And it really struck me as I don't recall any of this happening during the Olympics, which was arguably
Can't they
a
try
much
civil
larger event.
cases during that time? Like,
Yeah,
I don't get it.
it was an amazing loss of service, I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was stunning, and but I think it's just indicative of the problem, and they don't have that. Maybe it's an attitude shift that needs to be taken with the judiciary. I just find it unacceptable, quite frankly.
Okay, well, we'll dig into that one in a future episode. I noticed looking across the Rockies that Alberta has a measles outbreak.
Yeah.
Fortunately, in BC, we don't. I think there's only one active case in BC right now. But in Alberta, they have more measles cases there than the entire United States. 1,300 since March. No deaths, thankfully, but there's 15 cases, ICU cases, and 102 hospitalizations as of July 5th. Now, in BC, it was noted that the immunization rate in the northern health region is only 61%, and herd immunity is supposed to be 95%. So there are differences between the regions, and that tracks with general attitudes on vaccination for COVID. The north tended to be much lower than other regions. So all of that to say, is this type of issue going to be a tough issue for conservatives to manage? Because it tends to be on the conservative side of the spectrum where there's more anti-vax sentiment and skepticism towards vaccinations. And that's one thing on COVID, which I think that's been played out quite extensively politically in the last 5 years on COVID vaccines. But measles tends to be, I think, much more widely accepted that everyone should go get their measles shot at the appropriate age. Yet we're seeing this outbreak in Alberta. Jess, do you think the outbreak of measles in Alberta, combined with the reticence of some on the parts of society about getting vaccines, probably made worse by the whole COVID debate, do you think that could be a bit of an issue for the Conservatives on their right flank in BC?
I think that certainly could be, Mike, if they find themselves in a position where they have to continually deal with that right flank, if they have to depend on that right flank in their party. But it's just like any party, as we know only too well. If you become too committed, or if you depend too much on either extremes in your party, you have a problem, right? And I keep thinking that here we are today in British Columbia after an election, a very, very tight election, where today the polls, I think 338 has it basically in a dead heat in BC between the Conservatives and the NDP, that the Conservatives are going to stay in opposition if they continually cater to that the far right side of their party, which I know that there are a cadre of people within the leadership of that party around John Rustad that really are hardcore conservatives, and they want to be conservatives. They're not apologetic about it at all, and that's fine if they want to stay in opposition. But I contend that there's only a couple of ways of doing it. Either you move to the center, or you move further towards the center, or you bring them back to you. And bringing them back to you means that you have to have policies and initiatives that encourage those people to come to you. And so I think that during that summer trooping around the province that Rustad is going to be doing, he's going to have to bear that in mind, that those people who may not like his approach to vaccine programs, they're going to have to accept that that's a disagreement they have to live with, because it's very worthwhile to support him because of other issues. Don't become a one-issue pony on that one.
Is this kind of wedge issue that might be irresistible to the NDP, Geoff?
Well, I'm not certain how it plays out because, there are many people who do not want to be told what to do, even if they agree vaccination is appropriate. I don't know how much of a group, how big a group that is, or how difficult it is. It's partly the management of the issue and what support there is around it. So I recall during the COVID campaign, it was difficult and tricky and sensitive it worked to manage through the restrictions with faith communities, and not just evangelical communities, but Roman Catholics and Jews as well had issues with the way some of those mandates were issued. So I think it's important for government to remember that it's not as simple as slamming on a curfew and saying, well, we got a lot of measles up here, so everybody stay home for 4 weeks. I don't know that that's going to be the solution. So fortunately, the counts are significantly lower in BC, way lower. But it's a hard one. If Rustad's able to get through his review and present a more consolidated opposition, it would be very difficult days for the Eby administration. One of the best things that the David Eby has going for him, as Jess points out, is the disarray on the conservative side and the constant distraction by issues that are not that critical for most people. For, I think, the vast majority of British Columbians, it just passes the head nod test. I should get vaccinated. So, that's probably partly what reinforces Josie Osborne's determination to take the scientific advice on the Batten disease case that we talked about earlier.
Another issue, Mike, that's very similar to that, and talking about generating debate over the summer. We're all familiar with the wars that went on around decriminalization of drugs for personal use. And what most people don't realize is that the reason that we were able to have that decriminalization in BC was that Health Canada provided an exemption. And Geoff, you would know this much better than I and can explain it much better than I, but had an exemption from the Health Canada Act to be able to provide to be able to set that decriminalization place. But that was a time-specific exemption. It runs out in January 26. That's not very far from now. And if we want to go back into having those battles over decriminalization, then just let that happen. I mean, why wouldn't we be saying to the federal government today, I'm sorry, we're done, no more exemptions, we don't need it, thank you very much. And otherwise, we're just going to get back into that sidebar debate around decriminalization of drugs for personal use.
Well, many voters would be shocked, Jess, to know that we still have any of the exemption left.
Yeah.
Arguably, at the time, the Eby government should have just thrown up its hands and said, hey, this pilot program has already failed, so we're going to go back to normal. But by making the distinctions that they did and retaining the elements of the exemptions that they did, left room for this additional argument.
Our guest last week, Aaron Gunn, had canvassed this in the House of Commons, and I think he found that the minister in charge wasn't in complete command of the facts on the issue too. So I'm sure there'll be hay to be made in Ottawa and Victoria. So look, big news. Apparently there is life after politics. There's a new prospector in British Columbia who is a former cabinet minister, and that's Todd Stone. Now, Todd Stone working in mining, that kind of works, actually, now that I think about it. No stone will go unturned. Anyways, the Association of Mineral Exploration announced Monday that Todd will be the new CEO. And congratulations to Todd and to the association. Well, hopefully for them, it's a good marriage. But it's not always, there's not too many tears shed for politicians when they leave office, but it's not always easy to find your footing after you've been in politics for over a decade, as Todd was, to find something that's challenging and rewarding, or even, something that suits your skills, because not everyone really understands what the hell a politician does. So this is one case where someone has found their role. So we'll see what Todd can cook up in the mining sector.
Well, he's kind of gone underground since
so to speak.
Politics, and now he's going to stay there. I mean,
yeah.
No, good for him. Good for him.
Well, I don't think he expected to be job hunting, because he was a loyal member of Kevin Falcon's front bench. And when the turmoil unfolded, it looked like the John Rustad Club didn't want him as a member, and he felt the same way about them. So it'd be interesting to hear his take and perspective on those turbulent days that led to the undeath of the BC Liberals. Mike assures me it's going to come back soon.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I would like the BC Liberals to come back, because I think it would generate a lot of good pod content and keep our listeners engaged for that purpose
BC Liberals
alone.
/ BC United.
Well, why don't we go get a drink in the minibar?
All right.
Well, I can go straight from that life after politics very quickly, because I opened my Facebook feed just yesterday, and tumbled on this posting by Doug Donaldson, who was the MLA for Stikine between 2009 and 2020 when he stepped aside and went back to private life. He was on the Eagle Down Trail in Hazelton yesterday, and his friend and outstanding former Skeena Bulkley Valley MP Taylor Backrack was coming the other way, pulling his canoe, because Backrack is on a self-propelled epic journey over river, ocean, and lakes that started from his front door in Smithers, which is right by the river there. He pulled out at the Susquehanna because he thought the water was too high in the Bulkley Canyon. He walked his canoe all the way from there to Kassan for the night. That he expects to be in Hartley Bay, which is across the sea.
Yes.
Look it up if you haven't seen it. By the end of July.
South end of the Douglas Channel, yeah.
And then just to really make it crazy, he's going to go up through the Kitlope to Nanica and paddle home. And as Jess and I were saying before the show, if the bears don't get him, the mosquitoes will. But that sounds like a great epic journey, and certainly his head will be clear by the time he gets back to Smithers. So that's life after politics.
How big are those mosquitoes, Jess?
I can tell you, just remind you that the Kitlope, which is a spectacular part of British Columbia, 317,500 hectares that West Fraser Timber had the sole harvesting rights in, and they returned them to the people of BC with no compensation. And today it's a preserve for all of us. So that was a momentous contribution by the forest industry BC, by a company that started in my hometown, Cornell, 12 employees, and today is the largest lumber producer.
So you're telling me that West Fraser protected important mosquito habitat? Is that what you're telling me?
And grizzly, and salmon.
Oh, and grizzlies.
Yeah.
Okay.
So raising a glass to them, those two guys.
Excellent. Jess, what do you have to bring to the minibar?
Well, since I commented so positively about Adrian Dix earlier, maybe I'll just keep it going. I'm going to raise a glass to Marion Alto of Victoria. Her recent announcement of reassigning $10.35 million to deal with crime and violence on the streets of Victoria. I think that was true leadership. And more importantly, as importantly, she said that the money was coming from existing budgets, and here's what's not going to be done. So here's where the money's coming from, and we're going to redirect it over here. In other words, they were making decisions about priorities, and they decided that crime, violence, public disorder, and the disintegration of the livability of downtown Victoria was more important than those other issues. And so when I look at that, I think, boy, I'll applaud her all day long. That was good work, and I have to say that the mayor of Nanaimo, who also has a long history with the NDP, has also been a very, very active advocate for SOS, for our coalition, but for taking action on these things as well. So double glass, I guess.
Are there any other NDPers you'd like to raise a glass to? Is this good for your conscience? Or
Yeah.
atoning for your sins, for enterprise sins? Very good. Duly noted, Jess. Duly noted. And I will do the same. I will raise a glass to NDP MLA Grace Lohr, who posted on Instagram last week an update on her cancer treatment, and very candidly, and wishing her all the best as she goes into the next phase of her treatment, and also extending best wishes to her family as well.
Can I just add
Sure.
my good wishes to her for that as well. As you guys know, I'm going through my own treatment regime, and I want her to know that I've always thought that my job is to make it to tomorrow, because tomorrow might be where the solution comes up, where the new treatment may become available, and it's happening every single day. So I started my 9th chemo cycle yesterday, and I'm going to keep it going until there's a cure.
Well said, Jess. I know
Here,
you
here.
will. And great words of inspiration for Grace and for lots of others listening who are facing those circumstances. Well, thanks, Jess, for joining us today, along with Kim Haakstad for our interview segment. And Geoff, it's always a pleasure. Thanks to our guests for checking in, and to our presenting sponsors, TELUS and Fortis BC. We'll see you next week. BC, you can never leave.